What would you do if your last few dollars were just enough to feed your own child, but someone else's pain called out louder? In a world where most walk past the invisible struggles of strangers, one father's quiet sacrifice ignited a chain of events he never saw coming. A simple act of compassion on a rainy evening opened the door to a truth that would shake his very idea of fate, resilience, and hidden connection. This isn't a story of charity, it's one of revelation. Before we start, comment where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. He counted the coins like a man counting moments, each one scraped from the bottom of pockets, glove compartments, and old jars. There was just enough to get a loaf of bread, maybe a small carton of milk if nothing unexpected happened. For Michael, every trip to the grocery store felt like walking a tightrope strung over guilt and survival. Being a single father wasn't the hardest part. It was pretending things were okay for the sake of his son. He hadn't always lived this way. Once he had a job that paid on time, a car that ran without coughing, and a partner who helped carry the load. Now the mornings were colder, the meals thinner, and the silence longer. He had learned to live without complaints, not because it didn't hurt, but because there was no one left to listen. That morning had started like all the others. Stretch every dollar, skip breakfast, pack lunch for his son, and hope no bills arrived. But beneath the exhaustion was something quieter, more fragile, a determination to keep going. He never saw himself as a hero. He wasn't trying to be one. He just didn't want his son to know what it felt like to go to bed hungry. When he looked at his child, he saw innocence that hadn't yet been scarred by life's harsh edges. And so he carried on, making small sacrifices daily, hoping that eventually something, anything, would shift in their favor. The sky that evening wept in silence, matching the quiet ache in Michael's chest. The city always felt colder in the rain, not because of the weather, but because of how invisible everyone became beneath their umbrellas. Hunched shoulders, hurried footsteps, no eye contact. On his way home from the grocery store, carrying only a paper bag with 3 items, Michael saw them. A young woman with soaked hair clinging to her face sat under the edge of a bus stop shelter. 2 small children huddled beside her, wrapped in what looked like towels. They didn't beg. They didn't cry. They just sat, eyes vacant, stomachs growling louder than their voices dared to. He slowed his pace. There were others walking past, pretending not to see. But he couldn't. Something about the children's stillness gnawed at him. He remembered his own son just last week asking why dinner was just toast. That same hollow look. The pain of watching a child try to pretend they're not hungry. His grip on the bag tightened. He had no plan, no extra money, but something rooted him to the sidewalk. The woman looked up as he approached, her eyes red, but not from tears. They carried exhaustion too deep for crying. She didn't speak, but her posture stiffened. Defensive. He understood. She had probably been approached with offers soaked in judgment or wrapped in conditions. "I don't have much," he said quietly, kneeling to their level. "But it's warm." He opened the bag and handed over the sandwich and half-empty milk carton. She hesitated. So did the children. Then one small hand reached forward, trembling but curious. As the boy took the food, Michael saw something shift in her expression. Not relief, not gratitude. Something deeper, a flicker of disbelief, as if kindness had become a language she no longer spoke. The sandwich was split 3 ways. The milk passed between tiny lips like sacred water. Michael didn't wait for thanks. He wasn't sure what made him stop. But as he turned to walk away, he felt a weight pressed down on him. Not guilt, but the strange sensation that something unspoken had just begun. The cold bit through his jacket as he walked back home empty-handed. His stomach reminded him of the skipped lunch, and now no dinner. But it didn't sting as much as it usually did. The image of the children's faces, not smiling but softening, lingered. He hadn't asked for her name, hadn't thought to. It hadn't felt necessary at the time. What he gave was more instinct than intention. Still, part of him wondered, what if that had been his own child? What if one day the roles reversed? At home, his son noticed the absence of groceries right away. "I thought you were getting bread," the boy asked, confused. Michael hesitated, then smiled. "Changed the plan. We'll make pancakes in the morning." It was a lie, but a soft one, the kind told to protect what little light remained in a child's world. As his son drifted to sleep, Michael stared at the ceiling. The rain tapped on the windows like distant memories. He didn't regret the choice, but something inside him whispered that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, Michael returned to the same bus stop, sandwich and juice in hand. He didn't expect them to be there, but part of him hoped. Maybe just to know they were okay. Maybe to understand why her eyes haunted him. The shelter was empty, except for a torn piece of cloth on the bench, a child's glove, damp and small. He sat down, heart sinking with the realization that he might never see them again. But as he stood to leave, a quiet voice spoke behind him. "She told me you'd come back." Michael turned to see a man, probably in his 50s, holding a folded umbrella and an envelope. "She asked me to give you this." Confused, Michael took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "You gave more than food. You reminded me that I'm still human. Thank you." No name. No way to respond. Just those words, heavy, final, and strangely comforting. Michael folded the note gently and tucked it into his coat. He had no idea who she was. But something told him her story was far from finished. The letter stayed with him all day, folded into his wallet like a relic. It wasn't just the words, it was the handwriting. Delicate, careful, as if the writer hadn't held a pen in years. There was a weight behind every stroke, as though each word had been filtered through hardship. Michael couldn't stop thinking about her eyes, not because they were striking, but because they were guarded. The kind of guarded that comes from betrayal, not pride. She had seen something, lived something. The kind of story people hide because they fear no one will believe them. He replayed that short encounter over and over, and each time he saw something new. The way she positioned her body between the kids and the street, the way she flinched when he offered food. That wasn't just hunger. That was trauma. It hit him. She wasn't just down on her luck, she was running. From what he didn't know. But he had seen that same fear once before, long ago, in someone he used to love. He just hadn't been paying attention then. He would now. It wasn't just her that stuck in his memory. It was the eerie silence of the children. Not a single word, not even a whisper. Children cry, complain, ask for things. But these two had sat like statues, their eyes absorbing everything without expression. Michael had worked at a shelter once, briefly. He remembered how abused children often learn to survive by becoming invisible. The louder the world around them, the quieter they became. These kids had mastered silence like it was a language passed down. He wondered what they had seen, what they had endured. A mother who knew how to disappear. Kids who had learned not to speak. The pattern felt all too familiar. And yet, in their silence, there was resilience. They hadn't begged, hadn't clung to him. They accepted the meal with dignity, as though accepting help was harder than going hungry. That kind of pride wasn't taught. It was born from survival. Michael knew then that their story ran deeper than homelessness. It was stitched with secrets, and he was beginning to unravel the thread. Later that night, as Michael sat beside his sleeping son, memories he had buried began to surface. Years ago, before fatherhood, before responsibility found him, he had loved someone who lived between shelters and couches. She too had a child, quiet and observant. He hadn't stuck around long, too young, too selfish, But he remembered her saying something he didn't understand at the time. When you're running, even kindness can feel like a trap. That sentence echoed now with haunting clarity. Had he passed them before years ago, unaware? The timeline didn't match. The woman he remembered would be older now. But the feeling, the atmosphere, the silence, it was the same. Maybe that's why this encounter had clung to him like fog. Guilt layered with déjà vu. Maybe this wasn't just about her. Maybe helping her was a way to reconcile with the man he used to be. A way to make peace with his past. He had walked away once. He wouldn't do it again. Not this time. The anonymity of her note both frustrated and intrigued him. Who was she? Why hadn't she signed her name? She hadn't asked for help, hadn't shared her story. Just a gesture, a goodbye, and a message that felt like both closure and invitation. It was as if she was offering him a choice. Walk away now or dig deeper into the unknown. Michael wasn't sure what he wanted. Part of him feared becoming obsessed. But a larger part feared letting something important slip through his fingers again. He searched for her the next few evenings. The same route, same bus stop, even nearby shelters. No sign. Not even the kid's glove remained. Just damp benches and people who didn't meet his gaze. He asked around carefully, not wanting to expose her if she was hiding from something. But no one had seen her. No one knew a woman with 2 children. That in itself was suspicious. Cities notice things even when they pretend not to. But this woman, she had vanished, leaving behind only questions and the echo of her eyes. It was a small thing, but it sparked everything. A week after their encounter, Michael was volunteering at a local outreach center, sorting donated clothes. In the back corner of a pile marked discarded. He found it, a thin, flower-patterned blanket. He recognized it instantly. It had been draped over the shoulders of one of the children that night at the bus stop. Frayed edges, faded blue flowers, a small stitched tag with the letter E. His heart thudded. Someone had brought it in. Someone close. He showed it to the coordinator, who admitted a woman had dropped off a few things in a hurry. No name, no story. Just left them and disappeared. Michael asked to take the blanket. That night, he stared at it under the kitchen light like it was a map. That stitched E was a clue. Maybe a name, maybe a nickname. He didn't know. But the fact that she had come to the shelter and donated items meant she was still nearby. And for the first time he felt like he had a trail to follow. Michael began returning to the bus stop every evening after work, holding the blanket in a paper bag as if it were an offering. He would sit in silence, sometimes for an hour, watching the people pass. A few gave him strange looks. A few didn't look at all. The city moved around him like a machine, fast, cold, and indifferent. But he wasn't there to be noticed. He was waiting for something. When? He wasn't sure why he believed she would return. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it was instinct. But he waited. On the 5th day it happened. A boy, no older than 6, approached him quietly and pointed at the paper bag. "That's ours." Michael froze. The child didn't smile or speak again. Just pointed, then turned to run across the street. At the corner stood the woman, damp hair under a hoodie, watching cautiously. Their eyes met. She didn't move. He didn't wave. But for a few seconds the world slowed. She turned and walked away. And Michael knew. It wasn't over. It had just begun. When he returned home that night, something strange happened. As he unpacked the paper bag, still clutching the blanket, he noticed something inside that wasn't his. A small note, folded into a perfect square. It hadn't been there before. Had the boy slipped it in when he retrieved the blanket? Michael opened it carefully. The handwriting was the same as the first note. Neat, deliberate. But this time it was longer. I never meant to involve you. But you saw us. Really saw us. That changes things. If you want to understand, come to 318 West Haven. Don't tell anyone. Didn't say when. Didn't say why. But the address was burned into his mind the second he read it. His first instinct was caution. What if it was dangerous? But danger was already a part of her story. And now, by choice or fate, it was part of his too. He folded the note carefully, placed it beside the first one, and knew he would go. He had to. Before going to the address, Michael took a detour. Something in his gut told him to check local clinics, just to see. He had a connection at a nearby hospital, a nurse who owed him a favor. I'm looking for a woman with 2 kids, he said cautiously. Might have come in cold, maybe malnourished. The nurse hesitated. Confidentiality was a wall. But then she nodded slightly. I can't tell you names. But a woman like that came in last week. Didn't stay. Said she didn't trust the system. Michael pressed. Did she leave anything? A name, a form? The nurse shook her head. Only thing she took was a free first aid kit. And she asked if someone could remove a tattoo. That startled him. A tattoo? What kind? The nurse just shrugged. Didn't show it. Just asked if we could help cover it. Said it was dangerous if someone saw it. That detail shook Michael. Tattoos told stories. Some were personal. Others were warnings. He had a sinking feeling this was the latter. When he finally stood in front of 318 West Haven, it wasn't what he expected. Not a shelter. Not an apartment. It was a church. Old, quiet, nearly forgotten. He stepped inside. A young woman at the back whispered something to a man, then gestured for Michael to follow her down a narrow hallway. No questions. No introductions. Just silence, heavy with anticipation. The room she opened was small, dimly lit, and there she was, sitting on the floor beside her children, both wrapped in new blankets. She looked up slowly, warily. "Michael," she said, voice low. It was the first time he'd heard her speak. But something about it, familiar. Not just the tone but the cadence. He searched her face. Then it hit him. Not from this city. Not from this year. From years ago. A friend of someone he used to love. A night they had all stayed up talking, long before life pulled them in separate directions. He whispered her name and she closed her eyes. "You remember." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. But her next words made his skin crawl. "I didn't just run. I escaped." The room was silent except for the faint breathing of her children. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a tattoo partially faded. A broken chain linked through an eye. "It was a mark," she said. "For girls who belonged to them." Michael didn't understand. "Them." She nodded slowly. "A group. Underground. They traffic people. They brand them. I was taken when I was 16. Got out at 24. Changed my name. Had my kids. But they found me again 2 months ago." Michael felt his pulse pounding. "Why didn't you go to the police?" She laughed bitterly. "They own some of them." Her eyes met his, fierce but tired. "You fed us not knowing any of this. That's why I reached out. I need help, but I can't trust just anyone." Michael leaned back, overwhelmed. Everything shifted. The silence, the scars, the paranoia. It all made sense now. She wasn't just a homeless mom. She was a survivor of something brutal. Something buried deep beneath society's surface. And now he wasn't just a witness. He was part of her secret. And maybe part of her only hope. The pieces came together in Michael's mind like puzzle fragments falling into place. He remembered now. The woman had once visited his apartment with his then-girlfriend. She'd barely spoken back then, always quiet, always watching the exits. He had thought it was just shyness. But now he saw it for what it was. Survival mode. She had been running for a long time even back then. And somehow, fate had brought them back into each other's orbit when she needed help the most. "I never wanted anyone from back then to know," she said, lowering her eyes. "Especially not someone who saw me when I was still trying to be invisible." Michael shook his head. "You weren't invisible. I just didn't understand what I was looking at." The pain in her smile was real. They sat in silence for a moment, two people with different scars tied together by timing and consequence. He looked at her children sleeping on the folded blankets. They didn't just need food. They needed protection. They needed someone who wouldn't walk away. This time he wouldn't. The next morning he found her gone again, but not without leaving something behind. Tucked under a cracked church candle was an envelope with his name. Inside was a letter, longer than the others, handwritten with care. "If you're reading this, I had to move again. I can't stay in one place too long, not yet. But you gave me something I forgot existed. Safety. Real safety. I don't trust people, but I trust what you did. I'm going somewhere no one will find us. Please don't follow. But thank you for seeing me." Michael read it twice, then folded it with trembling hands. There was no address this time. No request. Just closure or something like it. But the final line at the bottom wasn't part of the message. It was a P.O. box number. He smiled. Maybe it wasn't goodbye after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of a cautious trust. In a world where most disappear without a trace, she had chosen to leave one. Life went on the way it always does. Bills, work, school pickups. But something in Michael had shifted. He had spent so long just trying to survive. He hadn't realized how much he'd been closing himself off. That one moment of giving, the sandwich and milk, had opened a door not just for her, but for him. He began noticing more. Not just the people on the streets, but the stories in their eyes. He stopped assuming. He started listening. And in doing so, he found something rare: purpose. His son asked about the woman once. Did she find her home? Michael smiled and said, "She's building one. One brick at a time." It wasn't just a poetic answer, it was true. She was out there, healing slowly, and part of that healing had started with him. He hadn't given much. But he had given when it mattered. And somehow, in a strange twist of fate, that small act had filled a void he didn't know existed inside him. He started volunteering more, not out of obligation, but because the numbness he once felt had lifted. He realized that kindness wasn't about fixing someone. It was about showing up, being the hand that reaches out when someone thinks they're completely alone. Helping her had reminded him of that. She had lived in the shadows. He had lived in routine. Both of them had been stuck in their own ways of surviving. But the moment their paths crossed, something shifted for both. Michael didn't talk about it much. He didn't tell coworkers or write posts about what he'd done. This wasn't about recognition. It was about connection. That story had been hers, but it had rewritten his too. Now, when he saw someone sitting alone in the rain, he didn't walk past. He stopped, even if just for a moment. Because sometimes the simplest gestures echo the loudest in someone's life. And sometimes they echo back. Months passed. Then, one spring afternoon, a letter arrived in his mailbox, the handwriting unmistakable. Inside was a photo. Her children, smiling in front of a modest brick house with a small garden. No address, just a short note. "We're safe. We're starting over. You were the bridge that got us here. If you ever need anything, we remember. Michael stood on the porch for a long while, the letter resting in his hand like a blessing. He hadn't expected anything in return. He never even imagined hearing from her again. But now, holding this simple piece of paper, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Not all stories end in grand reunions or dramatic closure. Some end with peace. Quiet, unspoken, but powerful. The kind that comes when someone is seen, heard, and helped without conditions. Michael may not have had much, but he gave what mattered. And in doing so, he didn't just help someone else begin again. He began again too.